He was a master of dark fire, that guy. And I think his unconscious fantasy was, let's see how much we can destroy before we die in the purifying flames. That was Hitler.
Well, I'm curious, what do you think about like the high-ranking officers in the Nazi Party? Were these psychopaths that were thriving in an unstable, corrupt situation, or are these otherwise decent people that just got twisted up in the
well,
times,
some of the, well, there were a little of column A and a little of column B. One of the things I've always thought about Hitler is that, you know, people, you have to admire Hitler. That's the thing. Because he was an organizational genius. You know, the thing that doesn't stop people from being Hitler, the thing, people don't refuse the ambition to become Hitler because they don't have the genocidal motivation. They don't follow that pathway because they don't have the organizational genius. They've got the damn motivation. And you know, if you take 100 people randomly and you talk to them, and you really talk to them, you'll find that 5% of them would take their vengeful thoughts pretty damn far if they were just given the opportunity. And in fact, they do, because they make life miserable for themselves and often for their family, and sometimes for anybody they can come near. And then maybe another 20% of people have that bubble up in them on a pretty damn regular basis. So, you know, you can have some sympathy for Cain. If you don't have any sympathy for Cain, then you're not. See, Cain and Abel also, they don't just represent two archetypal types of being. They represent, so it's not like you're Cain and you're Abel and you're Cain and you're Abel. It's like you're half and half and you're half and half and you're half and half. It's something like this. This is two different potential patterns of destiny. And you don't manifest one purely and the other zero. It's like it's like the line between good and evil that runs down the human heart.
Because I also found this picture of you with behind the pet. That is that you? I mean, it's you. But I mean, that's an actual photo of you. You did that.
Yeah.
So this is the Pepe flag, which I'm sure you know is seen by the left as a hate symbol, and
Well, the left sees all sorts of things as hate symbols.
but it's used by the extreme right as a way of spreading messages. It's seen as an alt-right symbol. This is an alt-right hand symbol, and here you are.
It's mostly used by young men who are poking and causing trouble on social media. That's mostly what it's used for.
But you're supposed to be anti-chaos and anti-provocation. I'm just wondering why you would choose to be in this photo.
You know, like there was certainly openings in the Nazi hierarchies for people who were compassionless and cruel and vengeful and all of that. The SS is a good example of that. But there's a great book that I would recommend to your listeners, to your viewers, called Ordinary Men by Christopher Browning. It's a great book. and it tracks the development of, so when the Nazis moved through Poland, they left policemen behind to maintain order, let's say. Browning tracked the behavior of this one unit of policemen. They were all middle-aged guys, just typical middle class, bourgeois guys. They'd grown up really before Hitler, so they weren't thoroughly indoctrinated like the Nazi youth, say. And they were sent to Poland. And their commander said, look, you guys, it's wartime, and there are traitors everywhere, and you're going to have to do some pretty horrible things here, but if you don't have to, you can go home if you think that's just too much. And none of them did. And you think, well, why not? They had the opportunity. But the reason was, well, they were comrades, let's say, in arms, so they had that esprit de corps thing going, and they were all thinking, well, I'm not going to run away and leave my colleagues to do all the dirty work. It's a war, and
they have a duty.
They have a duty, yeah. Okay, so fine. So, they started by rounding up all the Jews who were between 18 and 65, the men, and shipping them away. And they ended up by, this is rough. It's a rough book. They ended up, taking naked pregnant women out into the middle of fields and shooting them in the back of the head. And so you think, well, how does a man transform in that manner? And Browning shows you, it's not pleasant. They went through psychological hell each step of the way, but they went. So lots of times it was ordinary men who went down the bad path one step at a time, and sometimes it was people who were rotten to the core, like the Minister of Propaganda or Mengele, the doctor. I mean, he was a sadistic psychopath of the highest order.
Is there a mastermind? It seems so complicated to transform an ordinary man, as the book says, into just someone who's willing to execute a pregnant, innocent woman. Is there a mastermind that plots the course of that, or is it just does it just happen naturally along with the objectives of the how do they orchestrate something so complicated like that?
Well, I mean, the Germans are an organized people, and you have to admire Hitler. That's the thing, because he was an organizational genius. It's absolutely perfect. And then you see the same thing on the right here, eh? Look at the organization of that. Everything's square and perfect, and everybody's in line, and they're all in uniforms, and they're all going like this the same way. Hitler really didn't give out directives precisely. He sort of hinted at what he might want, and then his minions would get together and lay out policies in accordance with what they thought were his wishes. And I mean, there's another book I would recommend called Eichmann in Jerusalem. And Eichmann was really the architect of the final solution in many ways. And it's a characterological analysis of Eichmann, and Eichmann was in no way a psychopath. He was perfectly capable of, I think this is actually a true story. I might have it confused with another story, but it doesn't matter really. It's the same idea. There's a story about him driving home after work one day and running over a cat and having a terrible emotional reaction to it, And it's not like his kids didn't love him, and and he wasn't out there actually killing people. He was just making the plans. He was the bureaucrat behind the scenes, and he was the sort of guy who had his mom do his laundry when he went off to the army. He was a faceless bureaucrat. And he would have worked in any bureaucracy. He was worried about his next promotion. He wasn't thinking about the larger consequences. And so, and that's Hannah Arendt, and that's a very classic book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, and that's very much worth reading if you're interested in this sort of thing.
One of the interesting things I always heard about the Nazis that really humanizes them in a way is that they were, and I might be wrong about this, but they were passing out alcohol to all the soldiers, especially those in the concentration camps, to keep them intoxicated all the time so that they could not confront the horrible things they were doing.
You know, they had all sorts of they learned how to do it across time, right? I mean, you know, So Hitler started, one of the things Hitler started, it's a very strange story in many ways because Hitler was obsessed with order and cleanliness. He was a very orderly person. And he was very sensitive to disgust, you know, because you think, well, the Nazis were afraid of the Jews, you know, because they were other. And that's not right. What's more accurate is that especially Hitler, he was very sensitive to disgust. That's what it looks like. And if you're disgusted by something, then you want to eradicate it, right? If you're afraid of something, you want to run away from it. If you're disgusted by it, you want to burn it to the damn ground. You want to get rid of it. And his writings, like I read a book called Hitler's Table Talk, which was his spontaneous discussions during dinner time from 1939 to 1942. It's really another amazing book. And we had been doing some work inspired a bit by Jonathan Haidt, who's done a lot of work on disgust and the relationship between trait personality. And I was reading this book at the same time, and it was just unbelievable how often Hitler referred to the people he was eradicating, you know, the Slavs and the Gypsies and the Jews and all the people he went after, as parasites and as rats and as insects and all of that. So they were kind of put into that category. And here's a horrifying part of that story. Like when Hitler first came to power, he put in a lot of public health initiatives, including mass tuberculosis screening, which actually turned out to be a good thing. And at the same time, he went on a Beautify the Factories campaign. And so he convinced the German factory owners and so forth to increase the levels of hygiene in the factories, to get rid of the rats and the mice, to plant flowers out front, you know, to make everything look neat and orderly. And the insecticide they used was Zyklon. Well, Zyklon, to eradicate the rats and the insects, Zyklon, a slightly different formulation, was the gas that was used in the concentration camps. And so Hitler went from cleaning up the rats and the mice in the factories and the insects, and then he went into the mental hospitals and started cleaning up in there, and then like it just went broader and broader, again, sort of one step at a time. You know, and the Germans had plenty of reason to be resentful and hateful because, I mean, think about what they went through. We can't even imagine it. First of all, there was World War I, and so there was many men, like Hitler himself, who served in the trenches. And there's one story about Hitler. He won a medal for heroism in World War I, and he was sitting around with a group of his buddies and went off to do something, God only knows what. And when he came back, they were all dead because a mine had, not a mine, I don't remember, some kind of shell had landed in the middle of them and killed them all. It's like, that changes you.
Yeah.
You know, and then afterwards there was all these brutalized men who'd come out of the trenches. I mean, you just can't imagine what it must have been like in the trenches, you know, especially if you were there for like a couple of years. You weren't the same person. Get out of there, you're unemployed, your country's in ruins. Then the hyperinflation hits, and every single person in Germany who ever saved any money at all is flat, bloody broke. And then there's a communist revolution brewing in Russia, and it's like, it's hell. And the Nazis came along and said, well, not only are we going to restore order and greatness, but we're going to bloody well tell you whose fault this is. It's like, and Hitler, I've studied him a lot trying to understand what happened. And Hitler was, Carl Jung called him the mouthpiece of the collective unconscious of the German people. So you imagine there's all this resentment and hatred brewing underneath the surface, and all this chaos is there, and the desire for order is like clamoring in everyone's minds. And Hitler comes along, and he's a very powerful emotional orator, and he's watching the crowd, and he listens. And when he says thing A, nothing happens. When he says thing B, everybody roars. And so he takes note of that. And it's not even conscious exactly, right? Because he's being molded by the crowd. And so they roar. And so so that's a reinforcement. That's a reward. And so then he goes down that line a little bit farther, and they roar some more, and then he tries something else, and it's silent.
He
It's
becomes
like,
what they want.
you bet. Exactly that, man. He acts out the dark desire of the mob. So he becomes the embodiment of the dark desire of the mob. And that's partly why he had the charisma. It's right, because there's this unconscious fantasy brewing in the back of everyone's minds. You see that to some degree now with Antifa, for example, and their proclivity towards violence. And you ask, just exactly what's going on there? Well, Hitler came to embody the desire of the German people for order and revenge. And he embodied that fully. And you could say, so what happened was a collaboration between him and the people. It wasn't Hitler turned everyone into Nazis. It's like, no.
So the Germans had no idea what to do, and Hitler was a canny person with a brilliant sense of drama. I mean, he was a master of dark fire, that guy. And I think his unconscious fantasy was, let's see how much we can destroy before we die in the purifying flames. That was Hitler. So, and he was a compelling person, and the fantasy that he had in the back of his mind, I'll tell you how that developed at one point. It was a very hard thing to escape from. And that's why the Germans became Nazis. This was like magic that had emerged, and it was black magic.